afternoon. But anyway, I feel that in the morning we were in the space, outer space actually, and now we are coming down to the ground level and to our society, problems of society, individuals, and our political processes, etc. So I invite first speaker, first presentation, Professor Desmond Mallikarachchi. He, of course, everybody knows as senior professor who has always been academically active, controversial, and contributed enormously in his own field. He was a graduate of Virginia University and obtained his PhD from the University of London. And he was a former head of philosophy and psychology department in Virginia, and also honorary research fellow University College London and fellow of Werner Glenn Foundation, New York. Well, I'll call upon Desmond to make a presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. And first of all, I just want to mention that the introduction Mr. Saman Pushpakumar gave about me, and also the context in which that I have to discuss is my paper. It's not at all, I don't think that I can fit into that kind of high-flown academic philosophy as such. Anyway, now I will start my presentation, and also I just want to announce that soon after the presentation, I think I'd like to leave because of some personal problem. So this was, in fact, I just want to tell you all that this morning only that when I first came here in the morning, and then I got about 2 or 3 hours to write this paper. So therefore this is very sketchy and very sketchy paper. Yes, reverences. Oh no, actually Vaisham is not here at the moment, and head philosophy, professors past and present, and colleagues and students. Let me thank first of all Dr. Charita Hera, the head Department of Philosophy, for organizing the Philosophy Day seminar this year in style and with admirable quality. I also thank him for inviting me to present a paper on this occasion before a distinguished academic audience. As you will see on the screen, the topic of my paper is reading Marx's Capital as a materialistic moral text. Taking into account the time allotted to each presenter, that is 30 minutes, I will brief on 2 points. First, justificatory clarification of my adoption of the phrase materialistic moral. Second, moral foundation of Marx's MCM, that is money, commodity, money formula in Capital, Volume 1. First, that is clarification of my adoption of the phrase materialistic moral. Reading Marx's Capital as a materialistic moral text is an interesting topic, at least as far as I am concerned. But the phrase or the adjective in the second part of the topic, namely materialistic moral, may sound odd, paradoxical, and confusing. Therefore, it deserves a justification and a clarification. I am well aware of the confusion or even the contradiction likely to be generated by my use of the expression Christianity sound paradoxical and oxymoronic. An oxymoron is a rhetorical device that uses an ostensible self contradiction to reveal a paradox. Let me present some examples. Honest thief, benevolent dictator, I'm busy doing nothing, serious joke, and virtual reality. Another famous oxymoronic phrase is the same difference. The same difference have completely opposite meanings. Therefore, bringing them together into one phrase produces a verbal puzzling and at times even a contradiction. But the words materialistic moral are not opposites, as one can do a moral reasoning within a materialistic framework without confronting or contradiction. Marx did exactly this. The title of Ashish Dalela's recent book is Moral Materialism. But no contradiction traced by scholars regarding the title of this book. In fact, some scientists are of the opinion that moral questions are processed inside the brain. If they are right, then it is quite appropriate to adopt phrases such as materialistic moral or moral materialism. Mystic approach aside for the moment. Anyway, I could not find any other phrase to qualify Marx's views on morals, as Marx was both a materialist and a moralist at the same time. That is, Marx was a materialist cum moralist. That is enough of the seemingly troublesome phrase. Marx was a social theorist, an economic analyst, and a political revolutionary, journalist, historian, but he was never a moral philosopher, are the most popular identities assigned to Marx. The first five are of course true, but even the last characterization, namely he was not a moral philosopher too, in a sense is true, as he is not a moral philosopher in the traditional sense of the term. He, being an ardent materialist, clarified his theoretical position on this, emphasizing, I quote, "We do not preach morality, we create them." This quotation is from German Ideology, which of course, as we all know, that he wrote this with his friends, the close friend, and the ally, Friedrich Engels. Basing on this principle and on his material conception of history, Marx tried to build a moral system to redeem mankind from capitalist domination. Marx bases his entire thought on the following. His views on morals are no exceptions. I quote, "The first premise of all human history is of course the existence of living human individuals. Men can be distinguished from animals by consciousness, by religion, or anything else you like. They themselves begin to distinguish themselves from animals as soon as they begin to produce their means of subsistence, a step which is conditioned by their physical organization. By producing their means of subsistence, men are indirectly producing their actual material life." Now this quotation is from Marx again, from German Ideology, which was published in 1845. And I think this is the basis of Marx's philosophy, which is of course materialist. And what he says is, and what he has been trying to say is that we can talk of anything. We can talk of anything in the sense, even the ethical matters or the moral issues, within the framework of materialism. That is why this is the basic, the German Ideology, and also he repeats the same, or rather the same thing in various other texts, that is the material foundations of the world and also of our conception and ideas. Now, We will come to the moral number 2, moral foundation of Marx's MCM, Money Commodity Money Formula in Capital, Volume 1, or reading MCM from a moral point of view. Because I will be focusing only on this circuit. Only on this circuit, that is MCM circuit, which I find is very important and very crucial and vital to criticize the mechanism of capitalism. But still, the model or the circulation or the circuit has moral overtones. Taking into account the time factor, I will now straight away turn to Marx's Capital and will focus on the general formula Marx developed in Capital when analyzing the dynamics of capitalism. Marx introduced and explained in chapter 4 of Capital his famous general formula for capital, MCM. So, types of circulation are threefold. To put them simply and in brief. CC, that is capital C, CC, commodity to commodity. For example, a bag of coconut for a bag of rice. If you are a fisherman and you need some chickens, you will go to someone who has chickens and who is also in need of fish. You will exchange your fish for the chicken. And this is simple commodity exchange or transformation, commodity exchange rather. Then we have CMC, commodity to money and money to commodity. For example, a land is sold for rupees 5 million and then use that money to buy an electric car. Because Michael Samaraveer very recently said this about this. So that in fact, it is good that introducing electric cars are good. It is good, but only thing is that people who do not have money, they have to sell their houses and then buy the electric car. So therefore this is not CMC. I just gave you just an example, get an idea about it. So the ultimate purpose of CMC then is to consume use values, in this case the electric car. Or to explain this circuit a bit more, CMC is the simplest form of the circulation of commodities. The transformation of commodities into money and the change of the money back again into commodities, or to say the same in common parlance, selling in order to buy. But alongside of this form, we find another specifically different form, that is MCM. MCM, mudal, bond, mudal. Ar mulleke me singala in an exam ham mulleke bond, mudal, bond. Palaveni ke bond, bond. So, bond, mudal, bond is one circuit. The other circuit is MCM. So MCM, the transformation of money into commodities and the change of commodities back again into money. Or this already has a potential to serve as potential capital. That's the second. MCM, the last circuit of the trail, represents modern capitalism. Its ultimate purpose of the cycle is the accumulation of money. MCM cycle is never ending because the end product is simply more money. Here, money is properly thought of as capital. It is an end in itself and is put out into the market to buy goods in order to sell them for more money. As Marx says in Capital, I quote, capitalist goal is boundless enrichment, unquote. In MCM circulation, money ends the movement only to begin another cycle or another circulation. So the end of one MCM circulation generates the next circulation and it continues smoothly and uninterruptedly from capitalist point of view. If you examine the circuit MCM a little closer and with due care, you will see how this entire mechanism initiates humanity in general, and the quality and the dignity of the worker in particular. The same formula with little variation is continued even today. The same formula in the MCM formula. In this digital economy, still that is being used, and that is the formula. Let me elaborate this a bit more. In MCM circulation, money is exchanged for money, which makes no sense, as you are investing money, taking all the risks of losing your money only to end up with the same amount of money. But this circulation would make sense when you have a profit M or M plus. This is called surplus value. This poses a big question, which is the gateway into Marx's theory of materialistic morality or materialist morality. But Marx did not analyze the moral consequences or the ethics of the MCM circulation in detail. Where does this surplus come from? Or rather, where does this surplus value come from? The answer is a commodity which has the capacity to produce more value than it itself has. What is this commodity then? It is labor power of exploitation. It is not a virtue, but a vice, as it takes an unfair advantage Capital in volume 1. I quote. Capital is dead labor, that vampire during which the laborer works is the time during which the capitalist consumes the labor power he has purchased of him, and unquote. This not only mere an empirical observation, it is at the same time a moral condemnation of the behavior of the greedy capitalist himself. Which time now? Do you have? No, I know, but how?
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes, okay, right, fine. So, himself, right. Then, let me say about alienation also, otherwise it is incomplete. Because alienation, and for me, the CMC, I think I find these two concepts, or rather the one is of course the circuit and the other one is of course the concept, very important moral concepts that we find in Capital. That is alienation. Alienation of man in a capitalist society. Marx outlined his views about man's, in Here the Workers, alienation in a capitalist society, placing it within his well-worked out materialist framework. It too needs a brief mentioning here. For Marx, alienation takes place at 4 levels to dominate him as and his life. Number 2, man is alienated from other men through the competitive character of the economic system based on private property, which forces everyone to live at someone else's expense. Level 3. Man is alienated from nature, which does not confront him as a field for the creative exercise of his powers, but as a limitation on his creative power. Level 4. Man is alienated from society as the expression of social collective power. As long as man cannot be himself, as long as man is forced to play out a social role cast for him by the system, he cannot become the subject of ethics. His moralities are not expressions of his humanity, but reactions to his inhuman condition. When man recognizes the inhumanity of his condition, he leaves behind the fields of moralities and enters upon a human ethic. He becomes an ethical subject, my emphasis. That is, I have here. Who judges himself by the standards of his nature, instead of being a moral object judged by external criteria imposed upon him. Now I think, since I'm also in a hurry to get back home, so I will conclude or wind up this short paper, the very brief skit. As we will understand, nothing much one can do in 30 minutes, particularly on a theme like this. There may be problems with Marx's views on ethics in general, and obviously with my only to a few quotes of Marx.
Let me first confess that although we are in the same building, or we were in the same building, I'm not a philosopher. My area is rather different, economics, or I would say political economy. Well, the title of my presentation is Equilibrium and Disequilibrium, Dialectics of Equilibrium and Disequilibrium, kind of 150 years after Marx's Capital. So let me first start with my own subject, one of the social sciences, but which is moving further away from social science to become a more or less a natural science, that's economics. In economics, John Maynard Keynes in 1935, in his general theory, informed us that economic theory up to him is basically a equilibrium economics. Meaning, if the things are disrupted, if the equilibrium is disrupted, that re-establish equilibrium. In other words, the general condition of the capitalistic system is equilibrium. That's the sort of principal idea of capital, classical or neoclassical economic theory. But Keynes presented an idea which was very revolutionary at that time and very heterodox. He said, no, capitalism is not inherently equilibrium system, it is disequilibrium system. In other words, the general condition of the capitalistic system is not equilibrium but disequilibrium. So it's a very revolutionary and heterodox position when we look at or when we compare with the classical, neoclassical political economic theory. Why we call or why we see or why we couldn't understand this disequilibrium character of the capitalistic system? That is, if you go to a Peradeniya market or somewhere, you see things are moving smoothly, no disruptions, nothing serious happening. So in your day-to-day understanding, we think things are moving smoothly, disruptions are not very frequent, irregularities are less, so therefore system is in equilibrium. That is how classical and neoclassical, that conclusion that capitalist system is equilibrium system. In other words, I call it micro-sizing macro. You based from your individual microscopic situations and extended that to the macro analysis, thus you come with the micro in equilibrium. Keynes began with in a macro. When you look at macro, I mean this I can do this some time back. A friend of mine who went to an economist, who went to Spain, and Spain is in kind of a sick person system. 25% are unemployed. This is about even before this Catalonian incident. So I asked my friend, how is Spain? Is it in a kind of a crisis? He said, no. Things are happening as it is. No major disruption, not even strikes or anything. So seemingly it's an equilibrium system. So what Keynes said was, he looked at those macro situations and said capitalism is always or inherently a disequilibrium system. I started with this from economics, but this is almost similar to other social sciences. If you go to political science or even geography, it's something like that. System is basically in equilibrium, that was the kind of idea. But Keynes's idea was not taken well by the fellow economist because he was not able, or he did not, founded his macro theory on micro foundation. So that was the whole problem with Keynesian analysis, even though people like John Robinson, Pierre Straffa said economic theory. That advice seriously, because he was much more important, he was much more concerned about the situation at that time to come out of the crisis in the capitalistic system. So this brings us Marx. It was 150 years ago, his first volume of Capital published in German, Das Kapital. I think Desmond started that discussion. I will sort of extend what he said. So Marx develop a theory which combine micro-analysis with macro-analysis. Micro and macro combination. But it's a different kind of micro. It's not the micro of market. It's not the micro of neoclassical theory. It's a different kind of micro. So let me start with that a little bit. In kind of theories, their main focus is on things, events, structures, like that. Marx. I think Althusser is correct when he said that actually Marxism is not an extension of Hegelian system, but for different reasons. I'll come to that. So when it comes to the analysis, now the question is ontology or epistemology. As you can't have an ontology without epistemology. I may disagree. What is ontology? Well, number of definitions were given. In simple language, ontology is a theory of being. Epistemology of theory of knowledge. How we... Now, when it comes to Marxism, I think one of the most important things Marx have made is the distinction between false or empty abstraction and real abstraction. What does it mean? To understand that, let me quote another quotation from Marx, this time by Grundrisse, page 100 and 101. I'll quote. In precondition, unquote. Then another quotation. However, this is very important. On close examination, this proves false. It would be a chaotic conception of the whole, and I would then, by means of further determination, move analytically towards ever more simple concepts from the emerging concrete towards ever thinner abstraction, until I had arrived at the simplest determination. I will explain a little bit. Marx first talk about what other social scientists in his time and prior to that did. They started analysis with the whole, with the macro. like population, like income, GDP, like that, and started to move from that to markets, prices and things like that. So in other words, they move further downwards. Marx said that system is wrong. That is not what we should do. That should not be our epistemology. I'll come to the ontology later. Epistemologically, what we should do is not to start with population, because it's a very chaotic conception. Very concrete, but very chaotic. So he said, we must move from this concrete, chaotic conception to more simple and thinner abstractions. And he comes to the simple and thinner abstraction, as Desmond said, to commodity. So if you read Capital Volume 1, it begins with, I don't remember exactly, but it says the capitalist system is a system of generalized system of commodity production. So the commodity he abstracted from general, that concrete chaotic conception. So this is how we should explain, or we should distinguish what I call false abstraction and simple abstraction, false and empty abstraction and real abstraction. Because in many situations, most of the Marxists use Marxism as some kind of well, epistemology, but some kind of schema like this. In Marxism, very, very simple Marxism, we say there is a thesis, then you have antithesis, then the contradiction, and it moves to synthesis. That has nothing to do with Marx. In other words, you can use, just using Marxian categories, you can develop the Marxian dialectical system. That is what Marx said. I think if you read most of the history books written by some of the Marxists, you can see they are they are based on this kind of false and empty abstraction. So he said we should go for a real abstraction. So that is why he said we have to go for a simplest determination. So he comes to the commodity to begin. Then he said, from there, that is from commodity, the journey would have to be retraced until I had finally arrived at the population again. So he does not stop at the commodity. That's the simplest abstraction. But it's a real abstract. I'll say why it is real abstraction. Then he started moving again back to the population. But then you come to a population not as a chaotic conception, but as a rich totality of many determinations and relations. The concrete is concrete because it is the concentration of many determinations, hence unity of the opposite. I think this is the best quotation, as far as I know, from Marx, if you really want to understand the Marxian dialectical system. But when we come to that epistemology, Marx or Engels, especially Engels, say that nature, society is dialectical. It is not in our mind. This dialectics is not in our mind, not in our categories. We are not going to see thesis, antithesis. But what we are trying to do is the real situation, objective situation. Here, I think Nalin made quite a good remarks on this in his writings also. What is real? real has 4 elements, or rather 4 features. First is objectivity. Objectivity means what can be known, what is known, what can be known, but is still even not known. Second is fallibility. That is, the knowledge can be fallible when new information emerge. The third is transphenomenality. What does it mean? It means the truth or the real reality is not just what we can see or what we can feel, what we can see, what we can feel, or what we can hear. It moves deep. That's why Roy Baska said that ontology it's a depth ontology. So we have not only horizontally, but we have to move. That is why he said not only induction and deduction, but we need retroduction. That is why this transphenomenality. And the fourth item is counterphenomenality. Reality is counterphenomenal. Now, for example, we all say and we all believe, or not believe, we all say, and it's common sense. Sun rises. And sun sets. I mean, our language has given this, but it is not true. That's why it's counterphenomenal. So we have to look at this totality. That's the reality. I think that's the word I use, not materialism, not Marxian materialism, Marxian realism. So this totality is ontologically dialectical. That is Marx's point, or that's especially Hegel's Dialectics of Nature or Anti-Düring. If you read, that's what we can see. The nature, the reality with these 4 elements is ontological. So, episteme is to understand this ontological character, to see this ontological character, to see these things. So therefore Marxism is ontological basically. But to understand that ontology and to structure that and also to present that, you need epistemological. So I think basically Marxism is that. So when it comes to Marxian Capital, let me finish how we proceed. So if you read volume 1 of Capital, it is based on an assumption that capital is total, no division, no differentiation. But in reality, capital is differentiated, but no differentiation. So he assumed that everything was done in one big single monopoly factory. And that is how we explain capital-labor relationship in Capital Volume 1. So that's the level of abstraction. In the second volume, he concretizes it by adding, by extending, or by including. Capital Volume 1 is just on production. But in Capital Volume 2, he introduced circulation. So further concretization. He started with commodity and moved to money and to the production and capital accumulation. And then in the second volume, moved to second accumulation. So it's a very boring writing. And normally people don't read second volume. They read first, then go to third. No harm, but to understand Marx's system, volume 2. Then come to the third volume, in which he introduced differentiation of capital or capitalist competition. Different mode of capital, finance capital, banking capital, usurious capital, and many form of capital. And he wanted to start world trade and things in the next volumes, but he was not able to finish his project. So, I would say Marxism is basically an ontological. What he tried to understand is the ontological reality with its 4 elements using When you understand that, and when you systematize your knowledge, then you need how to proceed, things like that. And actually, if you do not understand Marxism and the capitalist system ontologically, then what you are going to do is you just use schema to understand that, then you will not find real capitalistic system. So with that note, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Lianage. Clear picture of equilibrium and what disequilibrium means, and of course the Marxist ontology. The third presentation is on Kant and Horkheimer, in which is senior lecturer in the Department of Philosophy. She has been teaching continental philosophy, Buddhism and Hinduism. She is playing a considerable role in disseminating philosophy to Tamil speakers.
Thank you, Chairperson, Reverend Chairs, Dr. Turning the epistemology other way around, he made a Copernican revolution in epistemology. I think turning other side, not only knowing outside, how do we know that self knows other things, like we know other things, no? So this is a Copernican upside down ontological base for epistemology. And there are, he is identifying 2 bases for ontology, not only one base for theoretical ontology, other one is, that is actually ontology. I think most probably we can say it's a phenomenology. A lot of people interpreted Kant's critique, first critique, I think Heidegger. So many other people interpreted, even first time the Heidegger identified Kant has a phenomenological basis, but actually, unfortunately, Heidegger interpreted ontology only. There are 2 differences. For me, there is small difference between ontology and phenomenology. I think Kant says in his first critique, in first half of the first critique, only theoretical base has this personal self. Like the theory is based on personal kind of self-ontology. But he wanted to transcend that and going for the other side, for the metaphysical side. There's no theory for metaphysics. First time to refute metaphysics as theory, Kant said he was giving some beautiful dialectics. Not only material dialectics, it's now we are talking about Marxism, and I'm going to talk on Horkheimer, how he relates with Kant. But actually, nowadays, people say not only Hegel, even Kant is the base for Marx. Kant inspired Marx. So what is the base there in Kant for Marx? I think he is the first person to identify these material issues, or even material issues, and how we have that epistemology of sciences, like so-called sciences. How is mathematics possible? How is natural science possible? That is the so-called natural science, the so-called theory of mathematics is possible because we can theorize with our theoretical understanding or ontological theoretical understanding. But because he reconciles reason and experience. History of Western philosophy is the series of footnotes to Plato. Last 200 years, without Kant, we can't philosophize. For or against. Each and every movement in Western philosophy influenced by Kant. I think after Kant, there's the German idealism. Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel. Hegel, all about Hegel himself identifies that he was influenced by Kant, accepts he's a kind of a student of Kant. And at the same time, young Marx is a Hegelian. So its root is coming from, even Hegel had not only idealistic view, it's a phenomenology. Even Hegel's first book was Phenomenology of Mind. That is actually, again, it's a root for phenomenology. Later phenomenological movements, we have a lot of movements. Phenomenology, existentialism, hermeneutics, or there are so many new issues, critical theory. Now I am going to take only one issue here, the Frankfurt School and critical theory. They all influenced by this critical tradition. So even Karl Marx wrote Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, or Critique of Political Economy, Critique of German Ideology. All these critique is very, very important, but Kant used this term in a middle sense, a phenomenological sense. He never had a slant in one side, but people used to say he has a conscious baseline. Always, even Horkheimer also had a criticism on that. I think, and not only that, and the second critic, he talked about internalization of ethics when they talked about Marxist ethics. I think Kant also have a deontological ethics, or kind of different form of ethics, like or even the whole system of epistemology for ethics, ethical reasoning. He talked about all about methodology. Even first book is all about methodology for ethics and sciences. After Kant, we are getting some philosophy of history, philosophy of religion, or philosophy of science, philosophy of anthropology. All these systems has a definite epistemology or kind of different approach after Kant. So in that sense, the critical theory, I'm taking only critical theory and Horkheimer now. What is Horkheimer's contribution? And what's the connection between this critique and critical theory? Horkheimer is first person to introduce critical theory in the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School is a school of thought, but university it was attached to the Institute of Social Research. The scholars who were attached to the Institute of Social Research, they wrote many books. The first director was Karl Grun. He was an orthodox Marxist. Second director, that is Max Horkheimer, he introduced the critical theory. First time, a neo-Marxism, or maybe Hegelian Marxism, or kind of a neo-Marxism, Western Marxism we call. He was influenced by maybe Karl Koch or Max Horkheimer. Max Horkheimer and all these Frankfurt thinkers were influenced by Karl Koch and, Lukács. They were Hegelian Marxists. I think not only a kind of orthodox, crude materialism, they are kind of incorporating young Marxist views and bringing some new issues in Marxism. So Horkheimer also had these issues. Actually, Horkheimer's PhD thesis was on Kant. Kant was a base for Horkheimer's practical philosophy. Horkheimer was a real and Frankfurt School and thinkers were very practical people. So for that, they reconciled theory and practice. I think Kant's PhD thesis was on Kant's third critique, which reconciles theory and practice. So that is very important because Kant influenced all these people, though sometimes Max Horkheimer in other writings, he was criticizing Kant for bourgeois ethics or even idealistic ethics. On ethics, they say this is something kind of a conscious level ethics, but actually that I don't know whether without consciousness whether we can have materialistic ethics. I don't know. That's not in Kant. That is my position. That's a conscious plus material. So that is like phenomenological ethics. Enlightenment is again that is criticized by Max Horkheimer. Why it was criticized? Then they were condemning the reason, the notion of reason in Kant. I don't think there is a problem. We can take it in the discussion. I think self-understanding, realization of self, broader self is the root of ethics. That is what Kant meant. But here, they are taking a kind of an individual self. That is the root for fascism, and actually this Frankfurt School was against this fascist and the sociological problem that time. They were really raised their voice against this social injustice or political injustice or the war, all these things they have done. So for them also, they have a deeper kind of a political commitment. But Kant too had deeper political commitment. I think Kant wrote a lot of post-critical writings, like What is Enlightenment and Perpetual Peace. I think his book on perpetual peace, Towards Perpetual Peace, is the route for UN charters. Again, I think most of the clause, it's like an ethical law book. It's all so much influenced the UN charters. So he's a political, he had a deep political vision in his What is Enlightenment also. It's a political writing. He said, dare to be wise, dare to know. So we have the courage to have your own understanding. So I'm asking, what is your own understanding, self-understanding? Even in Buddhism, we say self-realization is the keynote of everything, root of ethics. So what is self-understanding? So I think Kant's position also, that having the basis of self-understanding is the root of ethics. So that is very, very... Horkheimer, he was criticizing that his reason is a deceptive kind of this modernity has enlightenment project and that failed these things. But I don't think in Kantian sense it's not a failure for me, I don't know. I think he's having a broader sense of existentialism, and that is called phenomenology. That is the root for ethics. I think without understanding that, we can't have any kind of ethical projects. So, but Max Horkheimer is also very good on ethics, but with a bit of slant of material Marxism. But he is having 3 projects. One is refuting positivist approach. Positivism also damaged the value system. And the second one is the crude scientific approach, a kind of a scientism. Even these all Kantian roots also, even Kant also has. Kant has said, of course we can have science as a so-called science and theory, but is the true science is the conscious-based science. So I think that is the root for everything, even root for science, root for ethics. I think he wrote another book, Metaphysical Foundation for Natural Science and Metaphysics Morals. These are not metaphysics he refuted dogmatic metaphysics, but it's a reason, kind of a rational. When Herbert Marcuse in Frankfurt School, he wrote another book, Reason and Revolution. I think that is very, very important. Reason, without reason, we can't have revolution. So reason and revolution, reason in a very high conscious level. So that is very, very important. But Horkheimer, though he criticized those things, but he's also having a kind of very practical aim. I think, as he's quoting from Marx, Marx said, though philosophers are interpreting the world, the point is we have to change the world. But from that, I think, what is the basis for changing the world? I think without that, I can't mention that, but Max Horkheimer, he was telling not only this against positivism, against orthodox Marxism, and against scientism. All 3, he was focusing on his critical and traditional theory. He wrote Dialectic of Enlightenment. So like, again, giving a new interpretations for Enlightenment project. So they wrote, they have a criticism. I don't think Max Horkheimer understood Kantian real enlightenment. I think they were focusing on, because they think that Enlightenment project was the cause for fascism. But I don't think even the fascists understood that properly. So that is the issue. So Horkheimer had a very deep understanding on Marxism, but on Kant, he didn't have proper understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you have elaborated the mutual influences between Kant, Hegel and Marx, and also how the Frankfurt School tried to address philosophy to solve contemporary problems of the world. Thank you. Well, we are lucky that Dr. Michael Habake is here, right at point of time. He is working, actually, he's a German person, lecturer in, and translator and interpreter in Humanities Counselor at Cardiff University. Student of Vipassana Bhavana, completed his PhD on Carl Rogers. Before working at Cardiff, he studied at German philosophy, particularly at the Frankfurt School. So he is a capable person to talk about the Frankfurt School and Adorno, which will be a particularly valuable for our education system.
He has all forward.
Yeah? I'm not clear, na?
Yeah,
Okay.
but should be a complete career outline.
Hello, so thank you for inviting me for this talk today. I'd like to introduce
It's a different side of Adorno that you might not be very familiar with, which is a summary of this little book here called in German Erziehung zur Mündigkeit. In English it's Education to Maturity. So my article or my talk today is a summary of the essence of this book. So Adorno died in 1969, but my point is that Adorno is still relevant for us today, not just in Germany or in the West, but maybe also in Sri Lanka. And I'd like you to think about this issue. If we talk about coming to terms with the past, with reference to the war and any terrorism and any problems connected with that. So in terms of coming to terms with any trauma that society has experienced, like in Germany, for example, after Auschwitz. So Auschwitz, you're all familiar with that term, the concentration camp, which is in Poland today. Adorno made the point that this, in a way, was a marker point in history. It was not just one of the events of the war trauma, but actually it should be upgraded to a paradigm. Paradigm means here it's a new way of understanding. And in that sense, he's updating Kant's categorical imperative. So let's see. There is one particular image that I'd like you to see, which had a very big effect on me when I was standing in front of this. This was in an art exhibition in my university town in Germany. And it shows the carriage where the victims were. And this was done by a recent artist. And so if you not just understand it as a memorial, but there's a better word in German, which is Mahnmal. Mahnmal means there is a warning, there's a message in the word, which should be something that we need to take on board, need to experience to some degree, if possibly be opening to this kind of message. For example, if we could imagine for a moment, just for a moment, if it were us coming out of these carriages now, very well knowing that this is our way to death. So just for a moment, what would go on through, what would be going on in your mind while you're experiencing this? So this is a very different way of looking at life. It also had another significance. Adorno proposes a new categorical imperative and psychological conditions likely to lead So there are two main points which he highlights here. The debate about educational ideals would be trivial without updating Kant's categorical imperative. So the first one is to develop self-awareness, as Monica already has pointed out in Kant, social skills and communicative competence from preschool level onwards. So the interesting thing is that in Sri Lanka there is no real proper training for preschool teachers. And that is an interesting point, because it is kind of taken for granted that the children will kind of pick up, the main ideals of society somehow unconsciously. But this is the foundation that we lay for the next generation and future generations. And to critically analyze the psychological pressure under which individuals succumb to authoritarian rule and thereby reduce themselves to objects of manipulation. So today, this, of course, this was written in the 1960s as an update of his 1940s work. But today we might not experience society as an authoritarian society, but rather as a permissive society, or as a society in which hedonism is ruling. So in that sense we have to kind of find a way to update his own update. But I think there are similar personality structures in all kind of personality disorders. I'll come to that in a minute. Adorno's point is that the common view that people are seduced and victimized by an evil leader into blind obedience this was the one that we normally learned in history, in our history class. And we are all victims of an evil government or something like that. Yeah? So we are basically also innocent victims and have nothing to do with our own history. Freud's writings on group psychology and civilization in particular have shown how individuals change when they become part of a group, especially large groups. The group functions almost exclusively through unconscious instinctive mechanisms, which are just like primitive people worship, instead of systematically investigating the truth for themselves. If this insight would be incorporated into the school curriculum, Adorno argues a social climate could be fostered in which children become aware and learn to become more self-reliant. According to Freud, early childhood is the most important. The first 5 years are the most important for the whole life. So do we learn from our mistakes? Human history has evolved via a self-contradictory dialectical process. On the one hand, there are signs of progress towards a global world community, but on the other hand, there's also symptoms of collective destruction and regress into delusion, inhumanity, and irrationality. This was Adorno's and Horkheimer's contribution in Dialectics of Enlightenment. Technological research that blindly supports authoritarian regimes symbolizes that reason has always been a two-edged sword. As long as reason is used as a means or method to free the destructive. In Enlightenment, reason was regarded as the panacea that would solve all problems of humanity. But now we know that in the name of reason, many atrocities around the world have been committed and are still being committed. Authoritarian regimes tend to victimize minorities by using the most rational procedures, which simultaneously justify their aggressive policies. Adorno claims that it is not enough to analyze the logic of destruction, but that we need to study the subjective and objective conditions of violence in order to understand the underlying psychological and social mechanisms that lead to such behavior. Merely blaming and punishing the perpetrators or persecutors does not dissolve the unhealthy underlying conditions. So, is there any progress in history? What is progress? Today, society is characterized by a steady increase in social pressures that arise from a feeling of claustrophobia, of having to live in a socially engineered world with an ever tighter web of psychological manipulation, which has gone out of control. Technology, like electronic media, is never neutral. Most people seem to think it is just a means through which any message can be channeled, but it itself is not neutral. That is my point, and Adorno, in that way I'm interpreting Adorno now. The more powerful it becomes, the more it functions as a normative force. The pace of life has constantly increased through electronics, both at work and during leisure time. Actually, these media have dissolved the distinction between work and leisure, since we are expected to be available all the time, even during our holidays or when we are sick. Nobody seems to question this anonymous force that dictates our lifestyle, sets the pace of our interactions, and controls our desires. This has become the preferred network for channeling propaganda messages, for surveillance, and personalized subliminal advertising. The electronic entertainment industry plays a prominent role here, as it promises instant relief from all the fears and pressures of modern life. But simultaneously, it seduces us to use its media channels as substitutes for genuine relationships. People are being mediated through the internet, the more they are commercially exploited as objects at the receiving end. Today, economic growth is more and more based on this kind of service industry. Its psychological effect is that the individual mind is chronically being externalized and thus alienated from the subtler feelings in the body. People have become so conditioned by it that it has reached a stage of addiction, which is being glamorized as freedom through consumption. War games and loud electronic music, which are played for hours at night, in combination maybe with drug and alcohol, have a especially damaging effect, not just on the brain, but also on human relationships, on the ability to relate in a social, empathic way. Now, the importance of self-awareness. When people do not develop an awareness of self and others at an early age, they also do not develop the necessary virtues to use electronic media in appropriate ways. Without the inner strength to make their own independent inquiries into truth, they are more likely to repeat unhealthy behavior patterns. A person with an undeveloped or damaged psychic structure is much more prone to exploit himself and others than someone whose self long-term consequences or content. People who harm themselves are more likely to harm others. They willingly surrender to powerful messages and carry out orders for negligible rewards. This instinctive mindset was defined by Freud as pre-Oedipal. Not having worked through the unconscious identification with authority figures, it results in an uncritical superego, which dominates the unconscious needs, the id. Out of fear, the ego becomes over-adapted to external reality, which suppresses its underlying needs. In an over-adapted personality, guilt is evolved not when the natural needs have been ignored, but rather when the values of the superego have not been respected. The perpetrator's attitude towards authority is one of over-adaptation, which manifests in blind submission and uncritical obedience under anything stronger than himself. Inner strength consists in the capacity to handle conflicts in a constructive and creative way. The more someone surrenders under the pressure to conform, the less they have the courage to handle challenging tasks in creative and constructive ways. A weak character reveals itself through automatic identification with those in power, regardless of content. Adorno discovered that the prison guards of the camps, who were willing to carry out any job, however cruel, were mostly uneducated and mentally retarded young men from remote villages. Therefore, he suggests that the countryside should need to be given special attention to close the cultural and educational gap between villages and towns. In practical terms, he suggested mobile libraries, like a bus could come to a village once a week and offer. This is actually what happened to my village in Germany. And so that's where I actually started reading Adorno at age 16. Therefore, he suggests the countryside should need to be developed. And one of the examples is this educational means. The other one is to send counselors to offer services to families in need, damaged families, traumatized families from the war, adult education courses, evening classes, and distant learning programs. So the Open University started in response to that in Germany. So, and then also we had, up to that time, I think we only had 2 TV channels, first and second TV channels. I remember I was 12 when we got our first TV, and black and white. And then suddenly the third, in this time in the mid-60s, we had a third channel which was devoted purely for education. An important aspect for Adorno was, who was victimized himself in school, is the cultivation of a body awareness through which one's consciousness becomes anchored in the observation. This would counteract the impulsion to blindly act out violent verbal or physical behavior and sensitize people to the suffering they inflict on themselves and others. At the same time, it empowers us fearfully not to be able to observe these feelings. As part of the training about the damaging effects of harmful verbal and physical practices, neither masochistic nor sadistic sexual behavior should be glamorized. An awareness of cartoons on TV, you know, cartoons have more violence than other crime, other films in adult education, in adult films. So from early age, children are exposed to more violence and learn to laugh about it or ridicule it. This is a very serious issue. Or in competitive sports, to promote values of mutual respect and fair play. Also, what we have now recently is, you know, this nuisance of hooliganism in football stadiums. This should be made an issue also. So Adorno observed that in total organizations like military and religious organizations, initiation rituals are quite common, whereby pain is inflicted on new members of a group in order to make them lifelong supporters. This practice is historically rooted in some local customs that humiliate those individuals who do not obey the clan leader. But even mainstream education upholds some unrealistic ideals, such as being hard against oneself and ignore one's feelings. Their feelings numbs their capacity for empathy and compassion. Psychotherapeutic research has shown a direct link between blind submission under power and control and emotional coldness. So there's several research projects have been going on in that name. Blind submission is achieved when a person has turned into a fearful puppet, a passive object that has given up its natural curiosity and interest in learning. Someone who has lost a sense of who they are. The deeper this attitude is being internalized, the more it is then being projected onto others. Others are depersonalized and seen as an anonymous mass. This is the overall effect of TV in America, and maybe in other countries as well. I don't know, you have to make their own judgment about how it has affected children. Then Adorno defines the manipulative character in the following ways. A strong desire for streamlining, organizing other people, an inability to develop genuinely mutual friendships, a lack of emotional intelligence, an overvalued realism, no wish to improve anything, action for action's sake, regardless of content or meaning, blind imitation of stereotypes seen in advertisements, a willingness to reduce oneself to an object, an acceptance of force and even violence to make a person fit into a collective, and being meant. And this was tested, the first empirical research was done in the early 1940s by some other German social scientists. And they confirmed several of these points. Since most people are not born with this attitude and behavior pattern, some clarity is needed about the conditions under which this character type strategy would need to be developed to prevent its further deterioration by altering those conditions. Now, Adorno is trying to explain Freud in a social context. Freud discovered that groups tend to activate a herd instinct in the individual, which makes him or her feel secure and accepted. Right? It serves to keep collective guilt feelings suppressed and to celebrate each other's courage and collective narcissism. The worse the crime, the more the individual's perception has become distorted. Their thinking capacity is limited to absolutes, to black and white categories. Since such groups tend to change can usually only come from outside such groups. But if psychotherapy, for example, they might open up to change. So it was found that young soldiers in Africa, in Uganda in particular, who committed mass murders against their own tribal people, and who later underwent group therapy, became aware of the nature of the acts and then tried to repair the damage, and they became very politically active people. So there is a chance for them to turn this bad experience into something very positive. People like to view technology as an end in itself. They do not see it as a mere tool, an extension of human dexterity. But when the means of self-preservation are fetishized, it is a sign that the goal, a dignified human life, has been forgotten. For example, Adorno says that a person who fetishizes technology cannot really love. Their fetish shows an inability to genuinely care about others, because their whole energy is invested in developing and perfecting machines and computers as ends in themselves. This seems to be symptomatic for modern civilization as a whole. An obsession with technology as a substitute for genuine human relationships. In a highly competitive culture, students are trained to pursue their special interests from an early age, while altruistic projects are usually postponed to the time of retirement. So my conclusion now. If anything can help against ignorance and apathy as a precondition for crimes against humanity, it is first of all the cultivation of self-awareness. The avoidance of unpleasant truth and the rebuking of those who try to raise the issue make a recurrence of horror more likely. Based on Adorno's social and psychological research, the points that I've made here highlight some of the subjective mechanisms that allowed Auschwitz to happen. Those who have denied it will probably deny it again today. It is important to also try to understand the objective conditions under which minorities are being persecuted, and not to be misled by government propaganda. In addition, students must develop the courage to question the kind of technology that our culture promotes, and develop an understanding of how it shapes their perception. Education, if it aims for truth realization, must teach about the play of forces that operates beneath the surface. Walter Benjamin in English, once remarked that the administrators who turn into desktop criminals may not be prevented from planning their crimes, but at least their servants should be protected from those self-degrading practices that harm not. How relevant are these reflections for educational policies today? Does the Ministry of Education promote independent and self-responsible human beings, or rather self-market? If this kind of inquiry, it is this kind of inquiry that we would need to generate in schools and universities and society as a whole, try to keep people in a state of ignorance.
Thank you, Dr. Abeke, for that excellent and very relevant elaboration of Adorno's educational philosophy. And I think presentations. How much do we have?
1 hour's time.
Yeah, I think we have about 1 hour for discussion. Sorry that Ashman is not here. Anyway, I think I will try to summarize all the presentations. I think beyond my ability to do that. But anyway, of what I would call applied philosophy, from Critique of Capitalism by Marx to Adorno's most interesting, most topical, current philosophy of education. So it's a vast area of applied philosophy. We can now, it's open for discussion.
I could start with Michael's presentation. Actually, I'm not a specialist on Adorno or the Frankfurt School, but it seems to me that the way that Adorno suggests in your presentation, that is rather religious kind of alternative than the political, structural changing of the society. Now, which I heard was like kind of Marxist group of people who were trying to analyze society in order to change religious kind of point of view. I mean, he is not religious. I am saying that the way that he was just giving this idea to change society by changing their minds, like the Buddha or whoever, like Buddha and all this Jesus, all the religious leaders were arguing like you can change the society by changing people's mind. But the political and Marxist way of looking at things is very different, where you would be changing the structure in order to change the society. So, I mean, which line that Adorno took in his main philosophical arguments, not particularly in this book, what line that he took? To me, that it was rather different. But anyway,
Yeah, that's my point today. I wanted to show a different side also that you probably haven't heard. So this was the most practical approach that we offered to education in particular, because if it's not education, then it's just what So in these radio talks that he gave in the last few years of his life, he tried to particularly address education. So it had a very practical or pragmatic approach, which is a side that we normally don't know about. The problem he faced was that he himself was entangled in an internal contradiction himself. On the one hand, his theory, especially that he elaborated in negative dialectics, he says that we have lost a revolutionary subject today. And there is no class struggle going on at the moment. And with the proletariat cannot be clearly identified anymore. So the revolutionary subject has disappeared somehow. Although his students did try to develop action, and Marcuse was then the one who was then trying to be the spokesperson for the student movement, kind of always stayed more in the background within these. Main point in negative dialectics is that we are in a kind of a priori of a stuck situation. On the one hand, if we try to do something, we are bound to become guilty of cooperating with the wrong people. We are only consolidating the status quo. On the other hand, if we do not allow the system as it is to consolidate itself. So what do political practice that we can do at this time? And he could not give a clear answer to that. So this is the most direct answer he could offer, the most practical way. So to work in a one way, you're thinking holistically as a society, as a total society in theory, but in practice you can still do something based on self. In many of his, he tried to discourage his own students to go into kind of, so in Paris, for example, or we had it also in Berlin and in Frankfurt, but he found that many of his students were not really developed to that point that they had this kind of inner clarity, this kind of, you know, that they were themselves so conditioned to the society in which they lived that they were in a way projecting their own problems out and then multiplying these unhealthy conditions instead of dissolving them.
But isn't it non-political? Like isn't that methods non-political per se? Like, I mean, just looking at society and trying to change objective manner than just going into the social structure and the class base and all. Isn't it non-political to you?
I think In Germany, we have political education is a compulsory subject in all schools from the age of, I think, 16 onwards, or even earlier, 15, 16.
No, but I'm asking something else. Like I'm just asking, like as a theory. Now you now mentioned Herbert Marcuse, and I mean Marcuse's intervention was more political and kind of revolutionary than.
I can do it for you.
Yeah, that's good. Like I mean, it would give a
Just one question. I mean, non-philosophers answered that.
yeah.
Using hegemony, Gramsci, hegemony is achieved through culture. Hegemony, one aspect is hegemony is culture. Education is one most important aspect of culture. So if we change education, will there be a structural change in the hegemonic structure of society?
I agree to do that way. What Gramsci argued, that is fine. Like you have to respond to the hegemonic social structure as political way than that kind of religious way. What I gathered from Michael's presentation was like Adorno's intervention was rather like, you know, I mean looking at this way, like you can change society by changing all the people's mind, which Buddha said. You go and find people and change their mind, then the old people will change the world. But that is a kind of religious way of changing society. The Marxist and critical theorist point of view was rather different to me. That is, but I agree that the hegemonic relationship with education is there, true, accepted. But still, to change it, you have to identify it and you have to change the social structure in order to. I would like.
Well, it's a very clear difference, I think, between Adorno and Marcuse. Adorno are moving away from sort of individualistic viewpoints, but you have to do it in a collective position.